Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. I'm James Brierton in Charlotte. Well, you maybe were hoping for more snow this year, but we can take you back in time to more snow than any of us have probably seen in our lifetimes here in the Carolinas, unless, of course, you recall the 1973 snowstorm that goes by many names. It brought over 2 feet of snow to the Carolinas, and you may know it as the Great Snowstorm of 1973, the Great Southeast Snowstorm of 1973, the Blizzard of 1973. But just before we hit record, Frank Strait, joining us from Columbia, South Carolina, called it the Granddaddy of them all. And I think that is how I will refer to it from now on. So Frank is here with us as a member of our Carolina Weather Group panel, but also wearing his DNR shirt, representing the great state of South Carolina with Melissa Griffin, the assistant state climatologist for South Carolina, who jointly you guys have put together a great mountain of data, about 2 feet of snow's worth of data that takes us back to 1973 this week, when this great snowstorm was upon us. So I was not here in the Carolinas in 1973. So bring me up to speed on what I missed 50 years ago, Melissa.
As you put it, we call it the Great Southeastern Snowstorm, and I will agree that Frank, with the granddaddy of them all, is probably one of the biggest snow events that we've had here in the Carolinas. And that's not just here in South Carolina, but across portions of North Carolina as well. And this particular snowstorm was quite interesting. We actually ended up with record highs, and really abnormally warm weather ahead of this storm. And I'll let Frank talk a little bit more about the synoptic on that. But this one set records, and records that have not been broken in many parts of the state since 1973.
That's right. The storm that we had is, you called it the granddaddy of them all, and that's what I called it in a presentation I gave to South Carolina DPS at their winter storm planning meetings back in December. And it's because it caused the biggest 24-hour snow that we have seen in the state of South Carolina, the 24 inches that fell in at Rimini with this storm. It's not the biggest snowstorm of all, but that was at Caesar's Head for a 3-day event, but it's the biggest 24-hour snowstorm we've had.
Yeah, it is. It is one of the biggest events. So, here across South Carolina, I think, Frank compiled a bunch of the 3-day events. And I want to say at many locations, it ends up being the largest 3-day event. And that's measuring from the 9th of February through the 11th of February, 1973. Frank mentioned the statewide 24-hour snowfall total. But 8 of the top 13 occurrences of, the maximum amount of snow that we've had from a snow system actually came from this one event. And that's stretching from everywhere from Columbia to Blackville down to Lake City, Manning, Spartanburg. I mean, this was a pretty impactful event.
Frank, why don't you, for our audio listeners, take them through some of these numbers we have on the screen here?
Right. Well, of course, the big one is in Rimini, where there was 24 inches that fell. And the band of heavy snow went sort of right across the central Savannah River area, northern part of the Low Country, and across the South Midlands and into the PD region. And a lot of those areas saw 18 to 24 inches. Some areas came up a little bit less than 18, but we had 16, for example, in Columbia. And that much snow, it just had wide-ranging impacts. We had a lot of stranded travelers. We had schools out for a while, and even though it wasn't particularly cold in the wake of this storm, it took several days for the snow to melt.
I'll ask this question to the folks watching with us right now on Facebook and YouTube of the sorts. Tell us what you would do with 2 feet of snow if it were to happen today, or maybe regale to us what you did with 2 feet of snow 50 years ago, if that was in fact the case, if you recall some of these numbers, which I'll also say, and Melissa mentioned it a moment ago, it wasn't just South Carolina, it was also North Carolina, and even parts of Georgia got nearly 2 feet of snow, which, I mean, I'm a New Yorker who went to school in Georgia and now lives in Charlotte. So while I chuckle sometimes at how 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 inches can shut things down for a long while of time, I can't even fathom what 2 inches of snow in the South would do and would look like, because even by my New Yorker standard, 2 feet of snow is a ton of snow, and that is like you're staying put, you're not going anyplace.
Yeah, it really did catch a lot of people off guard with this particular system. We had the people woke up on the morning of the 10th and there was snow coating the ground, and it's really funny. The Charleston Evening Post even in their headline had like snow, kind of drawn across that, their the title page, and tons of pictures of snowmen and kids actually going out and enjoying this, because this was a generational type of snowstorm for here in the Southeast. But, along with that fun of having those snowball fights, sledding, and building snowman, Frank alluded to this. We had thousands of people that were stranded on I-95 and portions of the Low Country and even into the PD. And people were abandoning their cars because they were stuck in the snow. James mentioned he's from, the north. I grew up in the Delmarva area. And so, 2 feet of snow, we expect plows to come through, start moving the snow out of the way, maybe some salt on the ground or on the roads. And there was nothing like that. And no big fleet that, DOT had at the time that could clear the roads quick enough. So people are abandoning their cars on the side of the road and walking to nearby houses, hotels, trying to find some place to get out of the storm and actually stay warm during this particular event. And then the aftermath of that was, as Frank said, it would still stay cold and you couldn't get this, the snow wasn't melting. So you had all these abandoned cars on major highways across the state. And the National Guard had to come and, try and clear the road and make them passable again. And there were parts of the state that were impassable for, I believe, up to like 3 days after this particular event.
Melissa mentioned at the beginning of the show how warm it was ahead of the storm, but I know you pulled some data that the supports not only was it obviously below freezing during the storm, but it was actually at blizzard-like conditions at times. Is that right?
That's right. I have some observations here somewhere from this storm at the Florence airport. And at the Florence airport, there was actually blizzard conditions criteria met there. In order to truly be a blizzard, the storm has to produce heavy snow and winds gusting to 35 miles an hour frequently for at least 3 hours straight. And that happened with this snowstorm in Florence, and it's the only storm that I've been able to find. There might be others that I don't know about, but there are others. This is the only one that I've been able to find in state history that actually does meet that criteria as being a true blizzard.
I think one of the other interesting things that Frank found when he was going through this data was actual mention of thunder snow at the Florence Regional Airport during on the morning of the 10th. And, that was something that was also mentioned by a couple of our National Weather Cooperative observers at the time. So the observer in the Little Mountain area of South Carolina had written on her observer form that there was thunder at 3 a.m. in the morning accompanying the snow that was falling. So, there's 2 reports from that particular storm that kind of allude to this convective type of snowfall and probably, it helped increase some of those snowfall totals in those areas.
Melissa, you were talking before about going through and finding some of these data points. You guys both looking through the archives. This is long before M. Ping and Coco Ross. What type of data is it that you're looking at?
So some of this data that we're looking at comes from, and I mentioned the National Weather Cooperative Observer Program, and that's been in a program that's been around since the Organic Act in 1890. And so we've been fortunate enough to have observers that have, been part of that network for hundreds of years. We've got some families that have taken it on as their role and duty and have actually reported in the state for over 125 years. And, not only are they taking those measurements of the temperature, the maximum, minimum temperature, rainfall, and snowfall, but they're also leaving some comments behind, especially when they have these really big, impactful events. And so, I kind of mentioned the one from Little Mountain. I believe there were a couple others, and Jamie, you might have to scroll down a little bit further, but some of these forms I've kind of like broken out and, made them a little bit bigger. So, from like the Georgia area, so this is over in Appling, just across the Savannah River, they say snow began at 12 o'clock on the 9th, and that there was snow on the ground the 10th through the 14th. So, we kind of told you that it was cold and it took a while for that snow to actually melt. One of the other observers that we had, this is actually the observer from Pelion, South Carolina, who talks about snow drifts that were like 2.5 to 5 feet deep. And if it hadn't been for heavy tractors and a terrace blade, they would have lost some of their cattle. I mean, just trying to like imagine this going on in the middle of South Carolina is kind of crazy. Another one that we had from Blackville, snow and sleet totaled 17 inches. And that's some of the snow that remained in the shaded areas was there through almost the end of the month. So, just to kind of give you like the scope, it's hard sometimes to visualize that much snow on the ground, and how long it lasted. And then of course the report from Little Mountain there with the thunder, at 3:30 in the morning, 14 to 20 inch drifts of snow in Newberry County here in South Carolina.
And when you say it was warm before the event, you mean it was at 70 degrees before the event?
Yes, it was. It started off to be one of the warmer starts to February on record. So, I mean, there are a couple. So I guess this is the 5th. So you're talking just 4 days beforehand. It was almost 70 degrees here in Columbia. It was, 66 at Charleston, Florence, and Greer. So you're talking, and you can see there's a high pressure system that's like Southeast high pressure system. So you got all that nice warm, moist air funneling into the area. And so those temperatures were rather high through most of the event. That cold front moved through on the 7th. And then that's when it kind of like started to change. And I'm going to let Frank talk about what basically happened next after this.
Right. Well, we had sort of a 1-2 punch of storm systems come through. There was one cold front that came through, but didn't really knock the temperatures down that much. But then a second one came through. I think it was the 8th. So sort of 36 hours ahead of that storm. And there was a more genuine polar air mass that came in behind that, and it turned a lot colder. Now, the thing is, this was 50 years ago, and weather forecasting was still more of an art than a science, probably. And I went back and looked up some of the old weather forecasts that were printed in the newspapers the day before the storm hit, and none of them had a mention of any snow or any precipitation at all. So not only was this storm one of the biggest ones in state history, it was not really forecast. So,
Melissa, I want to take you back to the OBS that you were looking at from the cooperative. Where do you even find these sheets of paper?
They are actually on archive at the National Center for Environmental Information, which is the main archive for all weather data. And it's located in Asheville, North Carolina. So, but I'm lucky enough to actually have paper copies of some of this data in my office. And, I've joked around saying that, these are my prized possessions that I actually have in my office. And if anything were to ever happen to my office, you'd see me running in to save these things. But we're lucky enough that through a program called Co-op Modernization, they went back and they scanned a lot of these documents to try and preserve them, not only for the numerical observations, but also for those comments and that like qualitative data that goes along with it. And so some of these sheets go back to the early 1800s that, we have access to. And if anybody does follow me on Twitter, occasionally you'll see me throw up on this day in, South Carolina history. And a lot of those sheets I'm able to pull down from, this particular platform that they have there.
This is obviously a huge event. And we know that every winter, on average, the last couple of years, the trend has been it's getting warmer. And spoiler alert, when the temperature is warmer, it becomes harder to snow. So while these numbers are obviously outstanding, in context of 1970s, what were those winters like? Were they snowier winters than we have today?
From what I can remember, I mean, I grew up in Rock Hill, late 70s in the 80s. The late 70s and early 80s were colder and snowier than today.
Yeah.
That being said, the 70s are a cold period, and early 80s are a cold period in our climate record. So if you look back over the last 50 years, there's been a heck of a warming trend since then. But the warming trend, if you go back even further through to the beginning of our reliable period of record, is not as significant.
You mentioned a winter without, we might not get a snowfall. And yes, the little rodent that we all love to hate, did predict 6 more weeks of winter. But, we've actually had snow in late February, in March, in April, and even a surprise snow the beginning of May for portions of the upstate. So, I mean, it's not to say that we're completely like blocked out from snow happening, because we have had snow events that have happened later in the season. But usually you have to have a really good setup. You have to have a really good Arctic cold air, mass come through in order for those to happen. Not saying it's completely out of the woods, but, there's a chance.
Right. It's never really easy to make a snowstorm happen in the Carolinas, at least outside the mountains, especially South Carolina. But it gets really difficult, especially for South Carolina, once you get past February 15th.
Yeah.
That being said, one of the biggest snowstorms from when I was a kid was March 24th of 83. We had 10 inches in Rock Hill. And that was the 3rd or 4th day of spring.
Yeah. So it can
if
happen.
You dream it could happen.
It can.
Right.
Frank, February 10th through 12th, 1973, the snowstorm we've been talking about, the granddaddy of them all. What are some of the other stats you've been able to recover?
Right. Well, Rimini's snow is the state record, but there were some very heavy snow reported over a lot of South Carolina. Sumter had 21 inches. That was 17 inches in Florence. And, of course, that's where we had the verified blizzard conditions. And then 16 in Columbia, 16 in Aiken, and a few other spots that had at least 18 there. And the effects on the state were pretty substantial. There were at least 11 exposure-related fatalities in South Carolina. I got that from an old news article in the state newspaper. But that only covered a few regions of the state, so there may have been more in other parts of the state that weren't in that story. I-95 was not yet finished in those days. It was mostly done, but not quite. But there were many thousands of stranded travelers along that road and I-26. And at one point, there were 16,700 people, travelers in shelters around the state who were stranded by the storm. Governor John West, the governor at the time, issued a state of emergency, and that got the National Guard out to assist with the rescue and relief. And thanks to the fact that we had so much snow, in some areas the schools were out for a whole week because it just took that long to melt it off the roads.
So, digging through and looking at, I wasn't here at the time and don't really know too many people who lived in South Carolina in 1973. But, digging through the archives, looking through all the different newspaper clippings of all the different impacts that, happened statewide. I think probably one of the things that stood out to me was one of the headlines that I came across where, Governor John West declared by executive order that some counties would remain dry while the state of emergency was in effect. And there was actually a state of emergency effect for, I believe, 31 counties in South Carolina. I think 31 counties were actually declared federal disaster areas from that. And the removal of the snow was about $30 million at the time in 1973, which is about $220 million. You do that cost adjustment. But I just remember seeing the headlines about dry, that counties had to remain dry while they were under a state of emergency.
Well, what is being trapped in your home if I can't put a little Kahlua or something in my hot chocolate?
Exactly.
Yeah, I have the feeling that that emergency declaration didn't go over particularly well. I certainly could understand not having alcohol sales in restaurants in that state of emergency area too. But man, if you want to have a 6-pack, go to the convenience store and grab a 6-pack. Just walk.
Well, this is Melissa. Great to see you. Frank, pretty good to see you as well.
Absolutely. I'm here every week, Melissa. We bring her in when there's something that fits her area of expertise, and we're glad to have her on.
Who knows? Maybe
I'm glad to get to work with her. It's one of the things that makes working for the climate office is having her around and getting to see her smiling face every day and give her chocolate.
Frank.
Thank you again. I'm James Brierton, Charlotte. Stay subscribed. We will see you back here again real soon for more from the Carolina Weather Group. I'm James Brierton in Matthews, North Carolina. This tree, one of many that has fallen here in Matthews and across the two-state region of North Carolina and South Carolina following last Thursday's tornado outbreak. 10 tornadoes in all confirmed by the National Weather Service, who then spent Friday going out and surveying damage like this here at the playground of Matthews Elementary School. The school closed on Friday with power still out and trees like this still down. School was closed in Charlotte, Mecklenburg. Now, the National Weather Service happened to be celebrating its 150th anniversary this week. We're going to be talking about that coming up. The important life-saving mission they played today was all created over a century and a half ago. But first, let's talk more about the recovery efforts here in Matthews and across the region. This tree, the EF1 tornado coming through here on Thursday, caused damage across the region. 95-mile-per-hour winds knocking down trees like this, and also unfortunately taking down some homes where the roofs were damaged when big trees like this fell. All in all, we had about 2 storm deaths across the region, and that's too many. But it could have been a lot worse, and that's why we're going to spend some time in this episode talking about the very important life-saving role the National Weather Service played, because none of those deaths came inside of tornado polygons, and I think that has a lot to do with the role that the National Weather Service plays, getting those warnings out on TV, on radio, to NOAA weather radios, and now to our cell phones, wireless emergency alerts, alerting people like myself that they were in the path of danger. On Thursday, I was trying to make my way to the day job at the TV station when I received one of those wireless emergency alerts on my phone. I happened to be streaming on Periscope at the time. I'm driving here on Interstate 45. As that message comes in, take a look what happens.
Just now receiving an emergency wireless alert on my phone for a new tornado warning issued until 12:45.
Severe thunderstorm capable of producing a tornado was located 9 miles northwest of Indian Land or over Carrollton. Impact. Flying debris will be dangerous to those.
All right, so this actually might be a problem for me. All right, ladies and gents, we might be seeking shelter here in the next little bit because I'm going to be coming right into this, and that is not my intention. As soon as this lets up a little bit, I'm going to go and look for some damage in that area. Right now, I am not moving. I am just to the south of that warning. That is where I want to stay. I do not want to be in the thick of it, but I want to be able to move quickly afterwards to take a look at what might be going on around there.
Because of that alert sent by the National Weather Service and relayed to my phone, I was able to safely pull off the road, get out of the way, let that storm pass, and then I turned north, directly into where the storm had just been, continuing towards Park Road, where the storm had crossed through a neighborhood called Park Crossing. Here's a look at what I saw moments after that tornado came through and as that tornado was continuing east into Matthews. You can see we've got numerous trees down. This one, as it fell, took down a fence. We see several instances of this as we make our way through this Park Crossing neighborhood. Now, all of this damage occurred during the midday hour when a tornado-warned cell came through the neighborhood and it brought down several large pines, just like the one you're seeing right here behind me. To give you a sense of what the aftermath of storm damage smells like, it smells very heavily of pine and also sounds like chainsaws. We have another tree down here. This one just barely missing this brick home as it did kind of fall here and then continue to land, if you take another look, right across their front yard. So a very close call here for the family that lives right at the entrance of Chatham Oaks. This is inside again that Park Crossing Drive neighborhood. Now we are just to the west of Park Road. I was onto the east side of Park Road where the Cameron Woods neighborhood was not too long ago. Whatever came through here then immediately went through there, brought down several trees as well too. Neighbors out there trying to clear the way with chainsaws.
About 10 minutes before the trees started falling, so I was able to be here to help out.
How many trees are down besides what's behind us?
I'm not one for hyperbole, but it's countless at this point. There's trees on houses, there's a lot of roads that are blocked. We're just trying to get cleaned up so people can get through.
And also clear those storm drains, because as you can see, the rain is continuing to fall here at this hour, and so all of this water is going to need a place to run off. So you can see neighbors trying to also clear those drains as well. Back out here in the Park Crossing neighborhood, you can see this fence was no match for whatever came rolling through here a little bit earlier on, knocking down not only the wood sections of the fence, but also tearing it right from
the brick pillar. The National Weather Service will be looking at damage like this and like the tree laying across the road to determine what exactly rolled through here during the height of the severe weather. The EF1 tornado that came through Mecklenburg County, not even the strongest of the storms we saw. This EF2 tornado caused damage in Gaston County near Kings Mountain, where it toppled 4 of those huge metal transmission towers that Duke Energy runs to bring power into the region. It took 150 workers this past weekend to get all of that cleaned up and back up and running.
And when they twisted and laid on the ground, I mean, it's just the structures were twisted. If you go look at the footing of that, you'll see where it was a twist. It wasn't a break, it wasn't a bend, it just twisted the structures and they came down together. So it was a very severe wind that caused these structures.
From Gaston County to back here in Mecklenburg County, those were just 2 of the tornado warnings that were issued here for the greater Charlotte area. Numerous storms across the region, a lot of them in that greater Charlotte area. Joining us now from his home in Morganton, North Carolina is Scotty Powell with a look at some of the other storms. Scotty.
One of the first tornado warnings to be issued was for Cleveland and Lincoln County. The National Weather Service was able to confirm an EF1 tornado touchdown 1 mile west of Lawndale in northern Cleveland County. The end location was 3 miles northeast of Fallston, right near the Cleveland and Lincoln County line. One of the stronger tornadoes that we saw occur on Thursday was an EF2 tornado that occurred just outside of the city of Kannapolis, North Carolina, in Cabarrus County. The tornado began just west of Interstate 85 near Lane Street. The on-end of a service station was damaged. The strongest damage was found just east along Pless Road, where several homes were damaged from this tornado. This damage suggests wind speeds of 125 miles per hour. The tornado weakened as it moved east, snapping and uprooting trees as it went, and it ended in Rowan County. Again, no fatalities or injuries from this tornado. I'm Carolina Weather Group panelist Scotty Powell.
Thank you so much, Scotty. Continuing our coverage now with even more of those storm survey results from the National Weather Service. Here's Evan Fisher.
One of the first tornadoes to occur last Thursday happened in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Now, this one touched down pretty early in the day, before noon. It had a path length of 10.26 miles, so the second longest of the day, and a rating of EF1. This tornado did the most damage near the mall, just to the west, Westgate Mall in Spartanburg. As you can see here, there's a bunch of EF1 damage indicators near the mall area. However, as it tracked closer to Spartanburg, it did weaken a bit, and as it passed through downtown, there was minimal tree damage with just EF0. We had a pair of tornadoes in Stanley County, North Carolina, the first of which was pretty short-lived, only 0.4 miles long, the maximum width of 100 yards. Peak winds around 100 miles an hour, only did some minimal tree damage. However, the other one was a little bit longer with a path length of 7.3 miles, albeit discontinuous damage. But you can see here that there was damage indicators on the eastern side. Then again over here where there was a little bit more civilization. This tornado occurred just to the west of Albemarle, out in kind of a rural area. But nonetheless, this one did damage a child care center, ripping off some roofing, as well as damaging some manufactured homes with trees that fell onto these homes. This one actually had a maximum width of 1/4 mile, 400 yards, which is one of the more impressive widths of any of the tornadoes on Thursday. Moving a little bit further east, I guess all the way to the east, we actually had one tornado up in northeastern North Carolina in Gates County. As you can see, compared to all the others, if we zoom out, the rest of the tornadoes were down here near Greenville and Charlotte and Greensboro and Raleigh. However, there was one up here in Gates County, rated an EF0. We kind of flip over to the damage survey here. It tracked about 3 miles with peak winds of 85 miles an hour. Touched down near Taylor Mill Road and Askew Road and Cross Turner before doing some tree damage, as well as a few homes suffered damage, mainly from falling branches.
A lot of water that fell. A lot of water that fell from the sky, making it possible for big trees like this to fall in very spongy soil, but also challenging the water systems, the watersheds, the rivers, the creeks that now have to take all of that water that fell and eventually funnel it out to the Atlantic Ocean. We're watching rising waters along rivers and creeks and waterways that are now having to try to cope with all of that water. When you take a look at the debris that remains days after the tornado outbreak of last week, you have to pause and think for a moment and realize that it could have been a lot worse. But if it wasn't for the folks who tirelessly put in long hours at the National Weather Service, not only forecasting and warning about storms like this, but then spending hours and days afterwards going out into the field and looking at debris and conducting their storm surveys, well, frankly, if we didn't have the National Weather Service, we'd be in a lot of trouble. Now, the National Weather Service celebrated 150 years on Sunday. We, of course, wish them a very happy birthday. Now, we had Tom Nizzle on our program a couple weeks back. Now, Tom spent years at the National Weather Service in Buffalo, New York, before coming south to work at the Weather Channel. He now resides just across the border in Tennessee, and he's a bit of a National Weather Service buff, you could say. And he was very happy to spend some time with us to enlighten us on the history and the important role that the National Weather Service has played in its first 150 years and counting. Tom, you got to know the National Weather Service from the inside. What does this 150th anniversary mean?
Well, I'm old. I'm not quite that old, but man, I look back. I have 32 years in the National Weather Service. They're celebrating their 150th anniversary. So do the math, man. I've been there for 1/5 of their entire history. I am old. But I'll tell you, I love going back and look at the history of a National Weather Service for the United States. And a lot of it has its roots back to my hometown, Buffalo, New York, which was one of the original 24 forecast offices in the U.S. when the National Weather Service, under a different name, began back in 1870. It's amazing when you think about the United States and think about the roots of weather and weather observations. My gosh, when our forefathers came here to the U.S., think about the fact that everything they did in their lives had some connection to the weather. I mean, they spent most of their time outside. It was an agrarian society. So two of our most famous weather observers and our most famous original weather people in the United States were two of my favorites, a guy by the name of Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, right? Franklin was amazing. He was one of these Renaissance men that was interested in everything, and he was a great scientist. Franklin, by the way, was the first person to really study and chart something that's right offshore of the Carolinas, known as the Gulf Stream. That really was actually discovered in a way in a scientific basis by Ben Franklin. Franklin also took weather observations every day. How about Tom Jefferson, another Renaissance man? This guy took weather observations on a regular basis, and he shared those observations and developed a network with people that were around him. In fact, the cooperative weather observers in the United States today, their top honor that they can get is the Jeffersonian Award for them taking weather observations. So those are two of the guys that really started things off. You know, we get into the 1800s, and as the country began to expand out to the west, all right, now the beginning of the 1800s, Weather Service actually went into a national operation in 1870. So 70 years before that, the U.S. was moving out and expanding to the west, and based on Thomas Jefferson's suggestions, the Lewis and Clark expeditions, they wanted to take science observations. Most of the Army surgeons who were trained as scientists would take weather observations on a daily basis, and they would mail them back in. They would, arrive months later into places like the Smithsonian, where they would gather this information and bring all this information together, begin to plot it onto maps and try to understand this array of data that we were gathering across the country. But my gosh, none of it was timely. It took months to get that information. So you come across to about the mid 1840s, and we had this amazing invention that takes the science of meteorology and rockets it forward. And it was called the telegraph. Because once you got the telegraph, you could get this data from around the country that these surgeons were taking, and in almost real time, you could get it to one central area where that data could be compiled. You'd have the data quickly, you could analyze it, and then understand what was going on a more real-time basis. And this was all done at a place called the Smithsonian Institution. And Joseph Priestley was the guy that was there that was gathering all this information and beginning to plot weather maps. Well, we get into the Civil War, and that kind of detoured in some way the expansion of science as far as weather was concerned. But boy, the Civil War brought a lot of technical expertise and other inventions that would then help propel all of this technology and science forward. So let's get into the late 1860s now. And we're a couple of years beyond the Civil War. And the railroad transportation really wasn't coming into its own at that point. So a lot of the transportation that occurred between the inland parts of the country and getting out to the coast in the northern half of the United States occurred on the Great Lakes. There was a tremendous amount of shipping that occurred on the Great Lakes and moving not only goods and materials, but moving people and passengers around. And in 1868 and 1869, in 2 consecutive years, there were over 1,100 shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. Think about that, 1,100 shipwrecks and hundreds of fatalities on the lakes. Well, now I go into 4 cogs in the wheel that I think were most important people that were responsible for the development of a national weather service. Because of all the fatalities that were occurring on the Great Lakes, due to weather, by the way, due to severe weather, there was an amazing guy by the name of Increase Lapham, Lapham. This guy was, again, another Renaissance man. He was a geologist, and he was, at that point in Wisconsin, very interested in the weather. Again, a scientist by many, many means. He plotted weather maps, and he sent a lot of news clippings to his congressional representative about all these fatalities that were occurring on the Great Lakes. And there has to be something done to develop some type of weather warning system for these bad storms that were coming across the Great Lakes. So in 1869, I believe it was, Increase Lapham sent this letter out to his congressional representative, another second cog in the wheel by the name of Halbert Payne. And Payne took this information and introduced a resolution under Ulysses S. Grant to the United States Congress. And on February 9th of 1870, the resolution was passed to then bring into service a national weather service for the United States. And it was under the direction of the U.S. Army Signal Corps at that point. Why the Signal Corps? Well, it now brings in our third character. Our third guy that was in big responsibility and a big part of developing a national weather service was a guy who was in charge at one point for the Signal Corps in the U.S. His name was General Albert Meyer. And Meyer has a connection to my hometown of Buffalo, New York. But Meyer actually developed a signaling system during the Civil War of using flags to send signals between military installations. And this signaling system, or wigwag system, was in play, and it was in place during all of the Civil War. Meyer was an amazing character because he had a great military background. He had the ability to organize, and he also was in charge of this signaling system that they were using at that time. And so when Ulysses S. Grant signed the orders to bring into law a national weather service across the United States, Albert Meyer was brought in as the first head of the National Weather Service. And Meyer then brings in the fourth cog in the wheel, the guy that really made this happen from a scientific point of view. His name was Cleveland Abbey, and this guy was a scientist by every stretch of the word. He is the person who first began to issue forecasts, actual weather forecasts across the eastern part of the United States, and he had a tremendous science background. And when he came into that first beginnings of the National Weather Service, it was Cleveland Abbey who introduced science, who introduced coursework, who introduced the theory of meteorology and the science of meteorology to those employees who were hired to man the 24 original offices across the United States. It was really a fascinating time. And from there, the ability to bring in weather data and weather observations led very, very quickly to production of weather forecasts. Within a couple of years of the formation of the Weather Service, these daily forecasts were something that everybody asked for. People understanding that they might not be all that accurate all of the time, they weren't able to do the kind of detailed forecasting that we can do these days, but they had an understanding of the basic concept, in most cases, of weather moving from the west to the east across the United States. With the ability to plot these maps, the early forecasters were able to trace storms. And as storms were moving from Chicago to Detroit to Cleveland to Buffalo and out to New York City, these forecasters could time to some degree the occurrence of this bad weather that was coming in that direction. And as they would do that, they would put these signal flags outside of places like post offices and other places where the public would frequent within these towns and cities. And so a quick walk down the street, someone would look at the flag and they would understand that the red flag with the black on it, okay, again, if you were in a coastal area, could mean a hurricane warning that was out. There were other types of flags that they used to get this information out. But it was amazing how quickly the science grew and how quickly the Weather Service expanded as we went through that time frame right after the Civil War.
Tom, if you think back to what they started with and what we have today, if you could imagine, what do you think they would make of all the tools we have today?
Well, it'd be like being on a different planet. I mean, you think about the fact that, yeah, they were getting weather observations, but there was no such thing as a satellite to monitor the weather from space, a radar to look at precipitation, even heaven forbid, a computer model, something that would actually predict, foretell by using basic laws of mathematics what the weather would be like several days or maybe even into weeks in advance. It would be like a different world. And by the way, because I'm such a senior person at this point with a history of being in the National Weather Service, I came into the Weather Service at a time before computers were even introduced into weather forecast offices. At a time where there was something called a teletype machine, a machine where it actually typed out the weather observations onto this giant typewriter. And as weather forecasters, we would rip that information off of this machine and sit down and hand plot and draw weather maps. I got to do that when I was an intern in my first couple of years within the National Weather Service. And to go from that to what we have today is amazing. So I can't imagine what someone like Cleveland Abbey would be thinking if we were able to place him into a science office like we have within the National Weather Service today.
This is a very specific reference, and I'm not sure how many of our listeners will know it, but if you've ever been in the New York metropolitan area, and Tom, you're obviously from the state, and you listen to 1010 Winds AM, they have that tick, 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 tick. That's what I'm imagining when you say teletype, just all of that constant automatic typing.
So the RFK bridge getting up to the Bronx is also very slow, and because of that, leaving Manhattan.
That brings back memories for me, because that was the background noise in the Weather Service. It was like the old newsroom where you heard that, and that was the teletypes rattling away. I'm going back to my history only 35, 40 years ago in the National Weather Service. When I first came online, that's when we were first beginning to get satellite pictures, we'll call them, into the National Weather Service office. Now, we get satellite data today at minute intervals. It comes in on the computer. We run these huge loops at any resolution in any part of the globe on a regular basis. Everybody can do that online these days. In the weather office back then, we would get one image that would come in every hour. And if you wanted to do an animation of what was going on, all those images were placed on a clipboard. And you literally would take your fingers and take the pictures and let them go, and you could see the clouds moving across the eastern part of the United States. That was our animation back then. And that was after a tremendous increase in science and technology. It's fascinating because, as we all know, wars are terrible. War is hell. But wars also bring out tremendous advances in technology. And, World War II pilots, they were responsible for discovering the jet stream. As we got into World War II and immediately after, we developed the first large-scale upper air network across the United States with the launching of radiosonde balloons twice a day to get that information from the upper atmosphere, because weather occurs on 3 dimensions, right, throughout that depth of the atmosphere. The advance of weather radar. My gosh, you took military radar, again, developed in World War II. And then after that war, they not only saw airplanes when they were looking at the radar, but they saw these features that kept getting in the way of them looking at airplanes. It was precipitation from storms. And, we turned that into the ability to monitor weather systems and then get into the tremendous science of severe weather and understanding tornado genesis and tropical storm formation from all of that technology. So it's just been amazing to watch the history. And it all began back there in 1870 when there was concern for the loss of life on the Great Lakes and of course, along the coastal areas from shipping as well.
Tommy, you're talking about the advances in technology. One thing that kind of comes to mind is the advances in the warning process.
Trying to explain to the younger generations that we didn't have things like cell phones, right? Just a generation or two ago, with these text messages and alerts that came across at any time of the day or night, the ability to communicate that information has saved countless lives and will continue to do so. And the ability now to be able to put out 911 messages to a huge area, an entire community, to get that information out has been married with the technology that allows us to be more confident to get those warnings out by being able to use something like a Doppler radar to understand what we should be warning on and what we should not be warning on. Because in the early years of issuing severe weather warnings in particular, but certainly all types of warnings, much of the public was very frustrated with the fact that the weather forecaster may, for lack of a better term, cry wolf a lot of times and send these warnings and watches out and not be able to verify them because we just didn't have the technology to do that. But we've got that technology now. And to be able to then marry that to the ability for people to get warnings anywhere at any time, day or night, it has just gone a tremendous way to save lives across this nation.
Talking about communication, and then I'll toss it off to someone else. One of the biggest tools that I think we all in this chat utilize is NWS chat, and the ability for the forecasters and the weather office to communicate with TV, radio, storm spotters out in the field. I mean, just the instant communication that we have, I think is pretty cool. And it's cool to see the advances in the National Weather Service with that.
That's a really important point. And what it's done also is it's changed the responsibilities and the type of work that goes on within the National Weather Service offices. A decade, now I should say more than that, a generation ago, the main job of the National Weather Service forecaster, the meteorologist, was to issue the forecast. And now we have many, many tools that allow that process to be very, very fast, very efficient, and very smooth. But what the forecasters do now, where they really, really make a difference, is what we refer to as decision support or decision support services. That ability to get that information and get it out and let our special customers know exactly what is happening when it is happening, contacting emergency managers and working with the emergency management community to have their resources ready to go, to be ready to respond when the weather is coming through. And also, you mentioned this tool that is used on computers called NWS Chat. It's the ability for the forecast office to chat or to talk or message to many of its users, its media, its emergency management system, those types of individuals, to get the most reliable and timely information back and forth from those communities and sending out their thoughts from the National Weather Service offices. I found it fascinating when I worked at the Weather Channel that we, within a matter, and I mean this, within a matter of less than a minute in many instances, a damage report, say somebody had a half-inch hail that came down in their neighborhood outside of Charleston, South Carolina. And they sent a report in on their phone to the National Weather Service saying, we got hail here. Within a matter of a minute or so, the Weather Service gets the report, pops it into a computer that goes into this system. And at the Weather Channel, our graphics meteorologists were watching that data coming in. And when they picked that data up with the click of 2 buttons, it ended up on air. I was amazed to see how quickly that process took. And it's the ability to get that information and communicate it out to the public, because time is of the essence, especially with severe weather. So it's another huge increase in technology that, once again, is helping to save lives.
Tom, I don't know if there's any telling what this world would be like without the National Weather Service. So let me try to phrase this closing question to you this way. What would day-to-day life here in the United States be if tomorrow morning we woke up and there was no National Weather Service?
I think it would be chaos. If you think about how much of our economy and daily life is tied directly to the weather, and the way you see that most succinctly is being in the checkout line at the grocery store, because everybody's talking about it. You have to know what's going on with the weather if you're going to react with the real world. Everything from our transportation to our agriculture to daily life in general revolves around the ability to understand how nature, how the atmosphere is going to impact us over the next several days. Without the National Weather Service, I think we would be way, way behind in where we are right now.
We again thank Tom for his time, and to all of the folks at the National Weather Service who continue to keep us safe each and every day. We can't thank you enough. And to you at home, thanks for joining us for this special edition of the Carolina Weather Group. For all of us, I'm James Brierton in Matthews, North Carolina. We'll see you.
And let you guys see what it is that I'm experiencing.
Trying to get a direct measurement with a handheld Kestrel anemometer here. We'll see what we can pick up, but and there goes change.
When a tornado-warned cell came through the neighborhood, and it brought down several large pines, just like the one you're seeing right here behind me. To give you a sense of what the aftermath of storm damage smells like, it smells very heavily of pine and also sounds like chainsaws. We have another tree down here. This one just barely missing this brick home.
I mean, this is incredible. Let me turn the camera around. Get us back into kind of a dry view.
And I get up here, and all of a sudden the storm surge started. And all of a sudden, I ended up with about 4 feet of water.
I'm Scotty Powell here, reporting just outside of Sparta, North Carolina, where you've seen a lot of the earthquake damage. Again, a 5.1 magnitude earthquake rocked Sparta, North Carolina earlier this morning, just after 8 a.m.
If you go look at the footing of that, you'll see where it was a twist. Very severe wind that caused destruction.
From Gaston County to back here in Mecklenburg County, those were just 2 of the tornado warnings that were issued here for the greater Charlotte area.
I'm not one for hyperbole, but it's countless at this point. There's trees on houses, there's a lot of roads that are blocked. We're just trying to get cleaned up so people can get through.
Have you ever seen the Dan River like this before?
No, not that I can recall. I mean, I've seen it fairly flooded before, but I've never seen it to where we're now kind of asking ourselves, okay, a couple more feet and it might get over those bridges.